Welcome to the official World of Tanks Twitch Drops guide. In this video, you'll learn what World of Tanks Twitch Drops are, the different types, how to get them, and why you want them. Plus, gain some helpful tips on how to connect your Wargaming and Twitch accounts, and troubleshoot common issues had while claiming Twitch Drops. Twitch Drops are an extremely easy way to earn rare and valuable in-game rewards just by watching action-packed official World of Tanks Twitch streams and participating Twitch channels. There are three main types of drops. Guaranteed drops guarantee you a pre-selected item for watching special event streams, such as tournaments, for a predetermined amount of time. Mystery drops are also available during special event streams and guarantee random items from a given selection with a small probability of receiving high-value items such as premium vehicles. Mission drops unlock in-game missions that reward in-game goodies once completed. Keep an eye out on the World of Tanks portal for news on when these will be available. First, your Wargaming and Twitch accounts must be linked in order to be eligible to receive Twitch drops. Here's how to link your accounts in 3 easy steps. Go to your Wargaming account management page. Click the Twitch button in the right-hand column. Click to authorize the connection. After your accounts have been successfully connected, Twitch will appear as a linked platform in your Wargaming account settings, and your Wargaming account will appear in your Twitch account settings. Second, it might sound obvious, but make sure to watch live streams that are labeled with the Drops Enabled tag so you don't miss out. To find participating channels, browse Twitch for World of Tanks and look for the Drops Enabled tag. If drops are enabled, a notification will also appear at the top right-hand corner of the live stream's chat box. From there, you're on your way to earning a Twitch drop. Track your progress via the progress bar. When it hits the 100% mark, ensure to manually claim your reward within 24 hours following the campaign's conclusion to prevent it from expiring. Simply click on the Claim Now button via the pop-up notification in chat or from your personal drops and rewards inventory. And the next time you log into the game, your reward will be in your World of Tanks inventory. From time to time, it may be unclear if you've earned a Twitch drop, or if your account is even linked. Here are some basic troubleshooting tips. After claiming a drop in your Twitch inventory, log out and log back in to World of Tanks to receive your in-game reward. If you're not making any progress, refresh the stream and check the progress bar again. If you're still not making any progress, check that the correct Wargaming and Twitch accounts are linked. Sometimes unlinking and relinking is needed. For more tips, visit the portal and refer to the FAQ in the dedicated Twitch guide article. Hope you found this video helpful. If you're not already following the official World of Tanks Twitch channel, this is your cue. And of course, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and click that bell to receive notifications for future YouTube videos from World of Tanks. Thanks for watching!
Achtung! Wir wenden uns an alle Soldaten und Offiziere der Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe und Kriegsmarine. Das deutsche Oberkommando hat die bedingungslose Kapitulation unterzeichnet. Der Krieg ist vorbei. Wir rufen alle auf, die noch sinnlosen Widerstand leisten, ihre Waffen niederzulegen und sich den alliierten Truppen zu ergeben. Ihr Leben wird für den Aufbau eines neuen, erneuerten Deutschlands benötigt werden.
Das ist bloß ein Tritt. Wir kämpfen weiter, bis wir vom Kommando einen Befehl erhalten.
The war is over. German forces lay down their arms in the next 24 hours. But our isolated troops in the mountains don't know it. They are ready to attack. Your mission? Sneak through enemy lines and deliver the ceasefire order. Stop this pointless bloodshed.
Hello and a very warm welcome to this special VE Day 80th anniversary live stream. I'm Richard Catlin from World of Tanks and former tankie with the Royal Tank Regiment.
My name's Nick Winers and welcome to the Tank Museum, home to what is regarded as the world's finest collection of tanks. And whether you're joining us on the Tank Museum's YouTube or the World of Tanks Twitch,
we're marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe with a stream dedicated to the evolution of the tank during World War II.
We're going to be looking at some of the most significant tank designs from the key tank producers of World War II with the help of some special guests. But first, if you're new to the Tank Museum, this next video will tell you everything you need to know.
The Tank Museum, Bovington, UK. The home of the tank. The home of Tankfest. And home to one of the finest collections of armour in the world. The Tank Museum tells the story of the tank and the people that served in them. There are 300 vehicles here, most of which are displayed inside the museum's large halls. In fascinating modern exhibitions, you'll come face to face with tanks that have seen action in every major conflict since the First World War. From the world's first tank to some of the latest, there is an extensive World War II collection and unique examples of the prototypes that didn't quite make the grade. With a workshop facility and an extensive archive and supporting collection, the Tank Museum is a centre of armoured excellence, sharing its passion with a global audience on its YouTube channel. As a not-for-profit organisation, our work is funded entirely by people like you. You can support us by backing our Patreon, buying something from our online store, joining our Friends scheme, or simply by making a donation using PayPal giving.
For all the World of Tanks players, don't forget, of course, that Twitch drops are now enabled. And here is David Bagley, aka Ikibu, to tell you all about it.
Hello everybody and welcome. I'm David Bagley, or Ikibu, and I'm here with the Twitch drops information. Thank you to Rich and Nick for introducing. I couldn't make it this time, unfortunately. I hope to see you at Tankfest, where I may have already been looking up some tickets. And so the options for the Twitch drops, I'm going to look it down on my tablet because they are a little complicated. After 30 minutes, you will earn yourself 5 large first aid kits, 5 large repair kits, and 5 automatic fire extinguishers. After 60 minutes, you'll earn one of the following, and that is from the 2D style Battlefield, or the Cromwell B Tier 6 premium vehicle, or the premium vehicle XM66F. Now, after 90 minutes, you will have a chance of the following, which is 1 day of premium, the M4A3E8 Thunderbolt 7, or the GSOR 1010FB. Now, all you've got to do is just watch, claim, make sure you might relog, look after things will help you out. And that's all for me. I'm sure I'll see you later on in the stream. See you at Tankfest. Back to Rich and Nick.
Many thanks, David.
So yes, of course, the 8th of May was, of course, the 80th anniversary of VE Day. And this week, events have been taking place across the UK, Europe, North America and beyond.
And in this first video, we're going to take a look at how the end of the war in Europe was marked and what it meant to people around the world in 1945.
8th of May 1945. Nazi Germany has surrendered and the war in Europe is finally over. After 6 years of brutal conflict, millions of people spontaneously took to the streets in celebration. Church bells rang out, street parties erupted, and families could look forward to the promise of reuniting with servicemen overseas. Though the war was not yet over in the Pacific, VE Day was a badly needed moment of relief, reflection, and of hope. In the United Kingdom, crowds flooded the streets of London, gathering in Trafalgar Square and outside Buckingham Palace. King George VI and Prime Minister Winston Churchill appeared on the balcony to greet jubilant crowds, praising the endurance of the British people. Bonfires were lit, flags were waved, and dance parties lasted late into the night. Even Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen, joined the public celebrations, slipping anonymously into the crowds. In France, the people of Paris erupted in joy, filling the Champs-Élysées. The French tricolour flew from every building as people embraced, danced and toasted their freedom. A country which had endured occupation could now rebuild itself. Across the Atlantic, Americans celebrated with parades and massive gatherings. Confetti rained down in Times Square as sailors and civilians danced and celebrated. President Harry S. Truman dedicated the day to his predecessor, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had died just a month earlier. In the Soviet Union, the announcement of victory came on the 9th of May. Crowds gathered in Red Square as Stalin addressed the nation, and fireworks illuminated the night sky. The USSR had suffered immense losses, over 20 million dead, and they saw victory as a testament to their resilience and sacrifice. And that's why, 80 years on, we're proud to mark an anniversary that reminds us of the sacrifices made for peace and for freedom.
Now, of course, the sacrifices for peace and freedom are the focus of VE Day celebrations across the world, and we should never forget them.
But today we want to take a look at how armoured warfare shaped the conflict in Europe. And in this stream, we're going to examine the incredible evolution of tanks from 1939 to 1945 and beyond.
And beyond. Specifically, we'll be looking at tanks produced by UK, France, Italy, Germany, the USA and the Soviet Union, with the help of some very special guests from the Tank Museum.
Now, today we were hoping to be joined by our very own Paul Famajuro, who you might know as Fam the Tank Man from all of our social media channels, but sadly Fam was involved in a road accident this week. Fam, we are all wishing you a very speedy recovery and look forward to having you back soon.
And our next video looks at the origins of World War II and how it progressed in the first couple of years of the conflict.
World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history. In 6 years of warfare, the world was entirely reshaped. The origins of World War II are found in the conclusion of World War I. The effects of that war reverberated on in economic upheaval, the rise of extreme ideologies, and widespread social changes. Creaking European powers were challenged by the rise of aggressive communist and fascist regimes, whilst the US turned her back completely on European problems. Desperate to avoid another war, attempts to appease Nazi Germany in the 1930s merely emboldened Hitler to push for more. But the final straw comes with his invasion of Poland, forcing France and Great Britain to finally face the inevitable. War is declared on the 3rd of September as the Poles battle an onslaught from the German military. 2 weeks later, Poland is invaded from the east by the Soviet Union. The British and French dig in and wait for the expected assault against France, but Germany takes Norway and Denmark first in April 1940. Only then does the German invasion of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg and France begin. All resistance is crushed under the onslaught of Blitzkrieg, which sees the British and French armies falling back in disorder. At risk of total annihilation as the Germans push into France, the British army seeks to escape across the Channel from the beaches near Dunkirk. France, which has the biggest and best equipped army of all, is overrun in just 6 weeks. Now, Hitler turns his attention to the British Isles, launching bombing raids from bases in occupied France. The war in the skies is known as the Battle of Britain, and British success prevents a German invasion, but the Blitz, the bombing of British cities, will continue for months to come. Britain and her Commonwealth now stand alone, with Italy joining the war on the side of the Germans to form the Axis alliance. German U-boats are put to work in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, aiming to cut Britain off and forcing the rationing of food. Meanwhile, the focus of the fighting is shifted to North Africa, where Italian forces attempt to threaten another key British supply line, the Suez Canal. The Italians are badly beaten, but when Rommel arrives with his German Africa Corps in early 1941, the situation reverses with a series of British defeats. Yugoslavia and Greece fall to the Axis before, in June 1941, Germany launches its invasion of the Soviet Union with considerable initial success. Whilst officially neutral and with public opinion strongly opposed to intervention, the US has increased its support for the British through the Lend-Lease Act in 1941. But all that changes when the Japanese Empire attacks the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in December, prompting both Italy and Germany to declare war on the USA. As 1941 ends, the war has expanded considerably. Now Britain and her Commonwealth are joined by the USA and the Soviet Union in the fight against the Axis powers.
Welcome back to our special V-Day 80th anniversary live stream from the Tank Museum. I'm joined now by one of the Tank Museum's researchers, James Donaldson. Hello, James. Thanks for joining us. And he's going to be taking us through the German tanks of World War II today. But, James, let's start right at the beginning. And what was the overall German philosophy in this period, and what did it lead to?
So, to talk about German tanks of this period, we have to go right back to the end of the First World War. So, Treaty of Versailles, 1919. Germans aren't allowed to build tanks, not allowed to have an armoured force. Doesn't stop them. By the late 20s, even before Hitler comes to power, the Germans are still experimenting with armour. They're sort of done under the guise of agricultural machinery, but well, yeah, that didn't really work. But when Hitler does come to power, this accelerates. All sort of cloaking of the Panzer program goes away, and it is full-on rearmament. The first in these line of vehicles is, unsurprisingly, called the Panzer I. Mm-hmm. Now, this vehicle is very small, very light, is only armed with machine guns, so this is what's kind of the point of it. It's a training vehicle. It is a training vehicle to get the German Panzer arm, the tank forces, back into the game. Their nations that they're bordering are actually been in this game since they've not really got out of the game after the First World War, so the Germans have got a lot of catching up to do. So this vehicle doesn't see much service in the Second World War because it's a training tank, it's only armed with machine guns, but actually it goes out in 1936 to the Spanish Civil War. And within that, it performs reasonably okay. And in-game, you can see an example of that. They upgun them to have a 20mm cannon in the turret. Gives it a little bit of a sting against the other types of armour, the Soviet stuff that it's going to be facing on those Spanish battlefields. But as I said, by the time we get to the Second World War, it's really, really obsolete. It gets converted into a bunch of different vehicles. Panzerjäger, basically strip the top of the vehicle off and put a big gun on it. And actually what we've got in the collection just over around the corner is a command tank. I'm not going to try and pronounce the German on that one, but that sees service until as late as early 1943, so it really does stick around. Next, though, is going to be the Panzer II. Now, this is very much an interim vehicle. Still along the same lines as that training tank, getting the Germans up to speed, but it's armed with a little bit more poke. It's got a 20mm autocannon that, for its time, was, you could probably classify it as more than useful. It was actually quite good, especially if you're then facing the side of any tank, even in the early part of the Second World War. It's going to pretty much punch through it, looking at the British cruisers, really, for this one. But again, it's a stopgap training tank. It's very lightly armoured, but it is mobile. Crucially, it is very mobile, and that's what the Germans are looking for with this new tank idea. Strike hard, fast, and deep. Not dissimilar to sort of German 19th century or 20th century, early 20th century thinking. This time it's got tanks, supported by air power, artillery, everything. And this is why in May 40 they are able to punch through the Ardennes, which we thought was unpassable, but they punch through with these small, lightly built tanks. And, well, yes, the rest is history on that one. I said this is an interim vehicle. The Germans want something a bit better. What they really want for the beginning of a war that they envisage, I should say, is the Panzer III. And now this is, I'm going to use the phrase, but yes, it's not period accurate. I know that is going to be the main battle tank. It's the main anti-tank tank of the German army. Initially armed with a 37mm anti-tank gun, same one as that comes in the towed carriage pretty much. But actually this vehicle is really cleverly designed. It's ergonomically, I'd argue, perfect. You can see on that footage there that the commander's in the rear back of the turret, so he's got eye line on all 4 members of the crew. Gunner, loader, driver, assistant driver can all see him, which is brilliant. 3-man turret, we still stick with it today. It works. The other brilliant thing about this tank is the upgradability. So you can get a base Panzer III, you can slap extra armour on it. They built them from the factory with more armour. Our one especially, you can really clearly see those additional bits of armour. But even then, it's really exposing the German war economy. That front plate that's supposed to go over the mantlet, you can see the brackets there.
Yeah.
It didn't come with it. It rolled out of the factory with the hope that somewhere later down the line it might be put on. It was never, and it was captured as is. You can see what it was supposed to look like with the game footage. Armed with, as I said, initially a 37mm main gun, then upgunned to what we've got on ours is a 50mm. And that gun, not the 88, as a lot of people think, that gun is what ends the Matilda's reign of supremacy in the desert, which is quite an interesting thing, really. Basis for so many different variants, most famously the Stug, which we will get onto later.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, James. We will pick up the next phase of German tank development a little later on, starting with the Panzer IV. But now we're going to go across the hall over to Richard, and he's with our next guest, and we're going to start looking at some of the Allied armour.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm now here with Sam Kitchen, one of the Tank Museum's educators. So, Sam, the French, a nation that arguably had some of the best tank designs before the war.
That's true. So when France sort of entered tank development was sort of towards the end of the First World War, they really sort of had a good run at it, developing their different styles of vehicles. But most notably, it was that Renault FT light tank. That was the tank that really drove home their tank principle. It was a game changer of a design. It's that sort of traditional tank design we think of, the turret at the front, engine at the back principle. And they really drove that in to the 1930s. That design saw mass export around the world, influencing many tank designs some will even see today. But the Renault FT was that game changer, but they could push that design just a bit further. And that is where the tank behind me, the Sommier S35, comes into play. The Sommelier is designed as this sort of medium cavalry vehicle. Now, it doesn't look like it, but this 20-ton vehicle is capable of doing about 20 miles an hour, which isn't bad at all, especially for its size and its armor. It could field at maximum about 47 millimeters and put out a hurt from that 47 millimeter gun as well. This was a very effective vehicle, especially in its early stages of development. The S-35 was sent around Second World War. It was seen action mostly in the Battle of France, but was as well sent out to the desert and saw conflict there on both sides. Both the French and Vichy French used these out in the desert, where they performed quite remarkably. The issue that falls with the S-35, and this is common with other French tanks, was its lack of radio. This was an effective vehicle, it just couldn't communicate. So the commander who sits in that turret is incredibly overworked, as well as loading and firing the main gun, commanding the vehicle. Depending on his rank, depending on his stature within the unit, he might be commanding other vehicles simply through flags or hand signals. This meant that that tactical communication just wasn't there. But it wasn't to say this was a bad vehicle. It did see success with the French, but more notably, these were captured by the Germans and they were used for interior policing. Some of these were sent to the Italians to be studied for their vehicles as well. But what the Germans found, one of their biggest upgrades, is they put a radio inside of this, and that allowed it to have something it could have had at the beginning. But the S-35 is effective, but its more effective bigger brother, the Renault Char B, that is where French tank design really takes off. Now, the Char B develops from this First World War principle of not getting bogged down in combat. The entire vehicle is essentially built around the 75mm howitzer in its chassis. They nickname it the bunker bus drive red because it is powerful. It's very good at blowing up fortifications. So this vehicle was designed to have this 75mm, be able to traverse rough terrain, trenches, things like that. But what was in a later addition was the turret itself. This anti-tank capability was necessary when designing these armoured vehicles, and the turret is very much an afterthought. And you can see this mounted on the vehicle. It is very much exposed. It's one of the biggest weaknesses this vehicle had was its turret. Now, the armour on the front was massive. It's capable of shrugging off most rounds thrown at it at the time. Some considered it the most powerful tank in the world going into the beginning of the Second World War. But it was this turret that somewhat let it down. With the same downside, lack of radio, overworked commander, and this time a lot slower and heavier than the S-35, which led to this being outmaneuvered. When you have the panzers driving through France, when you have things like the 7th Panzer Division outmaneuvering this, its weak spots are located on the side, it's a big heavy tank, it's prone to overheating, so a radiator was necessary, and that was one of its biggest weaknesses, as well as that turret ring. But this, when it was captured by the Germans, was taken out as well, with the addition again of a radio for better communication. And also you'll see on our Char B, it actually has extra armour bolted to it. Because this was captured by the Germans, it was then sent over to the Channel Islands and saw the rest of the service of the war on Jersey. So it was used quite a lot towards the end of the war, but the Germans liked to modify it, and really it was an effective vehicle, which just never really got the chance to see action. But yes.
Brilliant, Sam, thank you so much. And we'll be seeing a lot more from Sam later on. Now, let's go for a little walk. And I suppose the question at this particular stage is, had British tank design lost its way? And to answer this question, and of course many more, a face I'm sure you're all familiar with from Tank Museum's YouTube channel, it's Mr. Chris Copson.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon.
I think you're absolutely right. British tank design in 1939 has well and truly lost its way. It wasn't always like that. If you go back to the 1920s, our tanks are actually rather good. We're ahead of the game. And we're also very good in terms of tank tactics. We're being really innovative on the battlefield. I'm thinking of things like the experimental mechanised force. But the problem is it all falls apart in the 1930s. And by 1939, we have a plethora of tanks. We have got light tanks, reconnaissance. We have got cruiser tanks, the equivalent of cavalry. And we've got infantry tanks to support infantry assaults. The trouble is, we haven't got one decent medium tank to bless ourselves with. And frankly, some of these designs are pretty poor. Now, the first pair of tanks I want to talk about to start with are infantry tanks, and it's Matilda 1 and Matilda 2. Now, if you look at Matilda 1 and you think that's a bit cheap and cheerful, you're absolutely right. It was built to a budget. They managed to produce 140 of the things for £5,000 each, which even in those days wasn't a lot to spend on a tank. But it shows. The tracks are exposed. It's almost like a sort of skeletal structure, really. The other thing is we were in thrall to Vickers. Vickers, massive armaments firm, but they dominate tank design and production. So basically, you get what they choose to give you. So the Matilda is a bit of a parts assembly. The suspension comes from the Dragon artillery tractor. The engine is a commercial V8, and the whole thing is a bit flung together. It's got one thing going for it. It's extremely well armoured, up to 60 mil. And the two crew, it's very cramped, there's only space for two of them, sit in what is effectively an armoured bathtub. But as you go to the turret, you get the main problem. It's only machine gun armed. Now, it's meant to support infantry. It's able to take punishment, but if you've just got a machine gun, you can't really ditch it out. And it's okay against infantry in the open, but if you come across AFVs, if you come across fortified positions, it's not really that good. So the army looks at this and says, well, okay, that's fine, but can we have something better, please? And what they come up with is Matilda's big sister. This one. This is Matilda 2. Now, it's a little bit bigger than Matilda 1, expanded lengthways and a bit wider as well. As you can see, we actually have armour plate around the tracks, more protection. The actual structure is very similar. You've still got that sort of beak front, and it's still very heavily armoured. But the big thing, new turret, 2-pounder gun. Now, the 2-pounder, a lot of people rubbish it, but I actually think for this period of the war, it's rather good. That will fire a high-velocity, solid shot, 2-pounder AP round, and that will deal with most of the armour of the period. Now, Matilda 1 and Matilda 2, 4 and 7 RTR are deployed to France in 1940, and they almost upset the Blitzkrieg apple cart, because at Arras, they counter-attack Rommel's 7th Panzer. They cause a great deal of consternation. They're beaten off with artillery and anti-aircraft guns, but because that has happened, we get this thing called the Haltbefehl, where the panzers halt. It effectively enables us, we would like to think, to stage the Dunkirk evacuation. So those are infantry tanks. Let's move on. Last two, cruiser tanks. And they are just over here. We've got the A9 and A10 cruiser. Now, the A9, this one, cruiser tanks, remember what I said, they're the tank equivalent of cavalry. So they're lightly armoured, probably 15, 20 mil max, but they are quite fast. These things, A9, A10, A13, they'll do 20, 30 miles an hour. The idea is speed as armour. But they're designed for a purpose. They're designed as cavalry. They are designed to exploit breaches, to flank the enemy, to get behind his lines. 1940 in France, that isn't happening. The Allies, British and French, we're on the back foot. We're having to fight a defensive war, and they're really not very good at that because they can't use speed and mobility. And if you look at this one, it's a mess, isn't it? I mean, you look at the front of it. You've got 2-pounder gun in the turret, yes, but then you've got these two machine gun turrets, drivers in the middle. The crew hated these things. They actually call them dustbins, the machine gun turrets. But the whole thing about it, that is shot trap city. So an incoming round is going to get funneled into that tank, into the interior, and cause chaos and consternation. So it's not really a very good design. The A10, if we move over a little bit, is a wee bit better. It's a bit more heavily armoured. They basically just bolted armour plate onto it, lost the machine gun turrets, and you're thinking, well, it's actually got a pretty good gun, hasn't it? Well, it's a 3.7-inch howitzer. The problem with that is it's not that good because, to be honest, it's only designed to fire smoke. So it looks a lot better than it is, to be brutally honest. These tanks go on They're deployed to the Western Desert. They do a bit better there because they're able to use speed and mobility. But then the Deutsche Afrika Korps arrive, very good at anti-tank warfare, using anti-aircraft guns like the 88, and the game is over for these early cruisers.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. And we'll see much more from Chris again later on. And now it's time to go back across to you, Nick, to discuss a nation that joined the war in June 1941.
Thank you, Richard. I'm joined here with Sam again, and he's going to help us look at the early contribution of the Soviet Union. So, Sam, what did the Soviets have at their disposal in the late 1930s, early 1940s?
Well, the Soviet principle, much like I discussed earlier with the French, was very much about this mobile, lighter cavalry design. So they very much went in with speed being its biggest asset. And this was shown quite massively with the BT series of tanks. They're light, they're fast, they're mobile, they're agile. But one of the tanks that really saw big prominence, especially in the 20s and 30s, was the T-26 tank. Now, the T-26 developed from the Vickers 6-tonner design, a very, very profitable export from the British with their design. Never really saw service with the British, but around the world inspired many, many different designs, the T-26 probably being the most iconic. And this vehicle saw service in most conflicts during the 1930s, right up to the end of the 40s, most notably with the Second Sino-Japanese War, the border wars between Soviets and the Japanese, whereas actually going against its cousin, the Hargo, built off the same style of tank design, as well as service in the Spanish Civil War, where this goes up against vehicles. And the engagements with this T-26 inspire some of the designs we'll actually see later on during this live stream. Now, the T-26 was very effective in the sense that it was mobile, the armour was good, the firepower was good, the addition of machine guns in the different variants, either rear-facing in the turret or added on top, was effective. This vehicle saw about 50 different variants throughout its operational history, be it flamethrowers, engineering variants, heavily armoured, twin-turreted. If you could put it on this vehicle, it was put on this vehicle. The T-26 was monumental in its usage, especially around the world. But it was very much this early principle that maybe lighter vehicles were the way forwards. But quickly this is changed when the introduction of more prominent anti-tank weapons are putting holes straight through this vehicle. They need to up armour, and really they've just hit the roof with not being able to put any more on top of this vehicle. But the T-26 is a good all-rounder vehicle, sees service really right through till the 60s almost. So it's a very, very much a prominent vehicle, very effective vehicle, but outclassed very early, especially going into the Second World War.
Brilliant. Well, Sam, thank you very much. We'll see you later on. But now I'm going to be joined again by Richard. And Richard, we're going to be taking a look at one of the many trades of the tank crew, the driver.
The driver, that first tank I ever learned to drive, Nick, was the Chieftain main battle tank. However, to look at a video now, we're going to go across and see a somewhat older vehicle.
My name's Gavin Barlow. I'm the company director of Armoured Engineering, and we specialise in the restoration and maintenance of World War II armour. Today, I'm at the Tank Museum teaching a small team of volunteers and staff how to drive, maintain and crew a Stuart M5A1 and a M24 Chaffee. Driving a Chaffee is fun and exciting, and it is probably the tank I would choose to drive. If I was given the option of, for example, the Centaur, a Sherman or a Chaffee, the Chaffee is the easiest one to drive, so obviously it's the one I'd want to drive. I could safely say that I could teach someone to drive a Chaffee quite competently in a day, which is what we're hoping to do today. The obvious thing with driving a tank is it's got tracks. And to enable the steering of the tracks, you use brakes. And the brakes are operated on tillers or sticks, like brake levers, either located up the top in front of you or down to your side, as they are in the Chaffee. You pull the left one to turn left, the right one to turn right. As in a car, you've got a steering wheel. So the Chaffee is particularly fast for a World War II tank. I believe its top speed's around 34 miles an hour. I have driven it that fast. It is exciting. It's not difficult to control at all. It's all controlled on throttle inputs and braking inputs. So to keep it in a straight line, you just gently pull the levers left and right, and it keeps it in a straight line. And you can control your speed and your braking with the throttle pedal as well. You can just throttle off to slow down, or if you really need to stop, you pull the brakes. So the engines in the Chaffee are automotive engines, so they're Cadillac V8s with an automatic box. So you just put it into drive like you would in an automatic car and just hit the accelerator and it drives the same as a car. The chaff is actually really easy to drive, but I think the hardest part of it all is learning how to use the high and low range lever. It's just very difficult mechanically to get it right without damaging anything.
And staying on the topic of the Chaffee, we're now joined by Ian Hudson, one of the Tank Museum's researchers, with an example of the Chaffee. Now, Ian, is it true that the Chaffee was the fastest tank of World War II?
It was certainly one of them, Richard, yeah. On good ground, so a road, you could expect to get 35 miles an hour, so 55 kilometres an hour out of this vehicle. And that suits it really well because this is a light tank, so it's intended for roles like reconnaissance, flank security, screening other forces, roles where it needs that manoeuvrability and that speed to be able to do its job. It's a very successful tank. A big reason for that is quite a lot of the components, the parts, have been carried over from earlier vehicles. So the powertrain, the engine, twin Cadillac petrol engines, and then the transmission here at the front, that's been carried over wholesale from the M5 Stuart. Torsion bars have been taken from the M18 Hellcat. That gives it quite a smooth ride. And the gun, it's not exactly the same 75mm gun as on the Sherman, but it fires the same ammunition. So you've got that firepower there. Whole thing weighs about 18 metric tons. And although there's only 25mm of armour, so it's quite lightly armoured, it's sloped, so effectively you get a little bit more than that. Now, according to the manual, it's got a crew of either 4 or 5. I double-checked, and that is what it says. We've got driver, commander, gunner, and then an assistant driver in the front of the hull just behind you. If there was a 5th man, he'd be the loader or cannoneer. If there wasn't, then the assistant driver would literally step up into the turret to do that job. About 4,700 are built. They enter service from December 1944. And just like all US tanks, they're used in platoons of 5. 3 of those platoons plus 2 tanks in the headquarters gives you in this case, a light tank company. 2 main units use these companies. We've got the tank battalions, where it's 1 light tank company and 3 medium tank companies, which are the same structure, but with the Sherman. So in those units, these things are playing a supporting role. Where they really come into the fore is in the mechanised cavalry groups, reconnaissance units, where a light tank company is providing the firepower for a unit which otherwise is just relying on jeeps and the M8 Greyhound armoured car. It's a very successful tank, widely exported after the war, and some countries even using them well into the 1990s, believe it or not.
Thank you so much, Ian. Really appreciate it. Now, while staying on the topic of the Chaffee, it is, of course, the star of our current in-game PvE mode, Operation Postman, which is running until the 13th of May and set during the final days of World War II. As an Allied commander, your mission is to navigate enemy territory and deliver critical information about Germany's surrender to the German forces.
Ni vida. Plus jamais.
Nigdy więcej. Never again.
Welcome back to our special VE Day 80th anniversary live stream from the Tank Museum. Now, remember, the Tank Museum is a registered charity and it relies on the support of people like you. Now, there are many ways you can support us, from visiting, donating, becoming a member, or buying something from our online store. And if you want to find out more about those things, please head across to our website, tankmuseum.org. But for now, as World War II progressed, the tank would play a crucial part in the battles of 1942 and 1943. And this is really where the tank comes of age. And in our next video, we're going to look at the events that shaped that second stage of World War II.
The situation for the Allies looks bleak as 1942 opens. Even though it's the high watermark for the enemies of Britain, the USA and the Soviet Union, things will get much worse before they get better. In the Pacific Theatre, the Americans and British Commonwealth forces will slog it out with the Japanese until September 1945. But our focus will be on the war in the West. The Soviets unleash a counteroffensive that blunts the German invasion on the outskirts of Moscow. Further south, two Soviet armies are surrounded near Kharkov under the weight of a robust German response. In the Mediterranean, the Germans are attempting to bomb or starve the British-held island of Malta into submission. The British military presence here is essential to keeping the army supplied and fighting in North Africa. Thanks to the successful delivery of RAF Spitfire fighters and supply ships, the Germans will fail. Meanwhile, the Dieppe raid is a costly failure, demonstrating just how challenging a seaborne landing in France will be. It will take careful planning, preparation, and need to be well supplied. The Allies are simply not yet ready. In Africa, Rommel is reinforced and launches an offensive against the British in Libya. He enjoys considerable success, running rings around his British opposition, pushing them back across North Africa. When the city of Tobruk falls to Rommel in June, 35,000 troops are captured, and the road to Egypt and the Suez Canal is wide open. He is only prevented from dealing a fatal blow by long supply lines and a lack of supplies. The commander of British forces in the region is sacked and replaced with General Montgomery. He gets to work restoring confidence, morale, and rebuilding an army that will soon be winning a string of victories, starting with the Battle of El Alamein in October.
El Alamein, 65 miles from Alexandria, became the focal point of resistance.
German forces in the Soviet Union turn their attention to capturing the oil fields in the Caucasus, shifting their forces south and aiming for the city of Stalingrad. What eventually transpires is one of the most horrific and costly battles in history. By November, the German attackers are encircled and cut off, but Hitler forbids their retreat. They will be destroyed and forced to surrender in February of 1943. The Germans are now under pressure in North Africa, where Rommel is being pursued across the desert by a reinvigorated British army. In the west of North Africa, Operation Torch has seen a US force land, putting pressure on enemy holdings in Algeria and Morocco. By spring 1943, the German position in North Africa is looking untenable as they're forced to fall back on the city of Tunis. In May, with Rommel recalled to Berlin, the Afrika Korps surrender, ending the war in North Africa. Now, the Allies look to cross the Mediterranean, capturing Sicily and then landing on mainland Italy. The Italians surrender and are out of the war. Meanwhile, the Germans launch the Kursk offensive. It's halted by the Soviets, who achieve a dramatic reversal. As 1943 ends, the tide has turned. As Churchill said the year before, it's not the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
And we're back with Chris. Now, Chris, it's been said by some that the T-34 won World War II. What's your opinion?
Well, let's just quantify that statement a little bit. I would say that the T-34 is one of the two tanks that won World War II. You got the T-34, and then a nod to our American friends, you got the M4 Sherman. Why those two? Because they're around in larger numbers than anything else. By 1945, roughly 50,000 Shermans, 50,000 T-34s against the Axis output, which is nothing like that. So, it's a numbers game, isn't it? Now, T-34 is a pre-war Soviet design. It comes out of the Kharkov works, and it's got a lot going for it. I mean, to begin with, I'm going to start with the nuts and bolts here. It's got one of the best tank engines ever built, the Kharkov K2 diesel. That is aluminium block, double overhead cam. I mean, it's a super engine, and it's got a lot of the qualities that modern high-performance diesels have. Good power unit, that's the heart of the tank. After that, look at the shape. Sloped armour. Now, the T-34, it's not necessarily the first, but it's certainly the first tank built to exploit sloped armour on a really large scale. And the reason is that, obviously, and a lot of people will know this, I'm sure, if you slope a piece of metal backwards, first of all, it encourages an incoming round to ricochet off. It also increases the thickness of metal line of sight that round has to get through. It's also very, very good in mobility terms. So you have got that excellent engine. You have got Christie suspension, an American design. Simplest explanation I think of for Christie suspension is big wheels and big springs, absorbs the bumps. It's also got wide tracks, so it's really good at coping with snow and ice and bog. All of the things that you find on the Eastern Front in very large quantities. This tank will do 35 miles an hour. And it's incredibly good cross-country. What does that give us? Well, it enables some of the major tank movements, of the double envelopment movement at Stalingrad, things like that. It's actually down, in many ways, to the T-34. So, that's the good stuff. What's the bad stuff? Well, to start off with, this is a T-34-85. This is a later version. These came in from 1944. The earlier T-34-76 had a smaller turret, smaller gun. 76mm gun. It's goodish for that time, but it becomes quite obsolete against heavier German armour. The turret also on the 76 is a two-man turret. That's a big problem because you've got two guys in there. You've got the commander and the gunner. Who's going to act as a loader? It's the commander. So he's got too much to do, effectively. They do change that, and they do produce this T-34-85 from 1944 onwards. The reason it takes that long is they are really... they don't want to interrupt the production process because they're churning these things out as quickly as they can. So, inside, well, I'm afraid the crew don't have a very good time. It's horrible. It's hideous to drive. I mean, most tanks are quite light on the controls. This one, you've got your tillers, and you're having to let go one tiller, haul with all your strength on the other one. She might just turn a corner for you. If you want to change gear, best keep a mallet handy. So it's difficult to drive. The internal arrangements, it doesn't have a turret cage. So the crew have to go round as the turret traverses. And a lot of the ammunition stowage is actually underneath the floor. Wooden ammunition crates covered with rubber mats. Trying to reload, trying to access that ammunition in combat is actually rather difficult. So there's a few sort of disadvantages to it. Having said that, as I said, it's a numbers game. It's got the advantage that it's actually very simple. It's tractor mechanics, if you like. The crew can actually do most of the maintenance to one of these things with a bag of spanners and a hammer. Take a Tiger or a Panther or something like that, you need 2 truckloads of technicians and a crane. So, lots of advantages there. I think one thing I would just point out, you won't be able to see this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think this sums up the Soviet approach to effectively crude but practical things. And it's something called a track pin. Now, most of you will know that tank tracks are steel links. They're held together with track pins. Now, if you're a German, you put one of those pins through, and then over the end, to stop it coming out again, you put a circlip and a couple of rivets. That's cool. It'll do the job, but it takes time. The Soviet approach, you have got, so you can see this, track pins there. You knock them through from the inside, This end, there's absolutely nothing. Now, those track pins and the holes will wear, and they'll get loose, and the track will get rattly. But as they start to come out, as the track goes round, there's a flange underneath that will actually knock that pin back in. No need for circlips and rivets. Simple, practical, effective. Now, the T-34 is obviously not the only tank the Red Army is fielding. You have got the early stuff, you've got the T-26, you've got the BT range. There's one other I would just like to mention, which is the KV-1 and KV-2. Now, these things, they are heavy tanks. KV, Klementy Voroshilov. He was the Commissar for Defence, and it's named after him. And this is a monster. It's the biggest thing on the battlefield in 1941. It is 40-odd tons. It's got 90mm armour. It is almost impossible to knock out. The only thing from the German perspective that will actually knock out a KV is the 8.8 centimetre flak. So it's got that going for it, but it's got the same turret as a T-34-76 with the same gun. It is big, it is clumsy, it is thirsty, and it's jolly expensive to build. So what they decide after a while is, why are we doing this? We could just build more T-34s. So they withdraw the KV from circulation.
Super, thank you so much, Chris. And now we're going to go back across to you, Nick, to continue our look at the German armour.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I'm going to pick up pretty much where we left off with James. James, we're stood by a vehicle which is often known as the workhorse of the German army. I mean, why was that?
Well, because it kind of was, really. It's the only tank that we're going to talk about today that served from the beginning of the Second World War to the end, but crucially was also produced from beginning to end. Like Matilda served, but was not produced. This thing was. And honestly, why is that? Well, because it's really quite good. Much like the Panzer III, it's got a very similar layout. You've got 3 men in the turret, 2 in the hull. But unlike the Panzer I, 2 and 3, where they all followed sequentially, this is to be a sister to Panzer III. They're supposed to support each other within the armoured units of the German army. So I mentioned the Panzer III initially was an anti-tank tank, as it were. This one was supposed to be the close support tank, lobbing high explosive onto target. So initially, we are looking at a short-barreled 75mm main gun. This one's got the upgraded long-barrel 75 because it flipped. Midpoint of the war, Panzer III cannot take a bigger gun. The 50mm is the biggest it can. This one, well, it can already fit a 75, so yeah, put long-barrel 75 in it, and this becomes the main anti-tank tank as well of the German army. The Panzer III then gets that short-barreled 75, so they really much do flip those roles. Much like the 3 as well, the upgradability is also huge, not just with the gun, but you can literally see on the front of ours here, you've got extra armour plate. Actually, 2 different levels of extra armour plate. Partly, it's also stepped away from the tank. This is to stop anti-tank rifle bullets from penetrating all the way through, because the Russians had loads of these things knocking about, like it was a real problem for the Germans. Also, the Russian anti-tank guns are quite good at this point, so they're looking at, we need to get more armour onto our existing tanks, hence the up-armouring programme. The other bit of armour on this vehicle is up here, if you can see it. You can see it on the turret, and it's supposed to have it on the sides as well, and this is called Schürzen. Now this, a lot of people think it's for shaped charges, famously bazookas and later on RPGs, but this is not the case. It is also for those Russian anti-tank rifles. It'll penetrate the side skirts, but it will mean that bullet tumbles before it ever gets near the hull. Yes, they then become extremely vital for countering those shaped charge weapons later on in the war, but actually Schürzen, and what we now know really as bazooka plate, erroneously, to stop bazookas. It's really quite good. There are a few of them knocking around in France 1940, but mainly they're the vehicles we spoke about earlier. This comes really into its own even after the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Starts getting pumped out big time after that. The British see this properly in the North African desert, and actually they're quite, it's better than anything we've got. Those cruisers that Chris was talking about earlier, I mean, their Panzer III was overmatching them, let alone this. We call it the Panzer IV Special, with the long barrel on it. And yeah, it was sort of the envy of many British tank crews, I'm sure. But even then, despite this being in production for the whole of the war and serving right up until, well, yeah, VE Day, 1945, it wasn't quite good enough. The Panzer V is what the Germans really want, and that is Panther. And that is really based off of the lessons of that Russian vehicle you've just looked at, the T-34. Sloped armour. This one's got flat armour. Why do we like sloped armour? Well, it's more effective. But the big downside is you lose internal space. So they're like, okay, weigh it up. We're going to want to go sloped armour because the benefits outweigh the costs. Panther is one of the first vehicles as well to introduce that iconic interleaved road wheels. So you can get more weight with less track. So it spreads the weight out much more evenly. Downside to it is in the Soviet mud, the Russian mud, and that freezes, it will clog up those interleaved road wheels quite easily. So when you're dealing with Russian winters, it's not ideal at all. Panther first sees combat at Kursk in 1943. It's rushed out of production. It's rushed to the front line, and it is beset with problems. It is really unreliable. They are struggling to keep these things in the fight at all. Not due to enemy action, but due to unreliability. Panther, it then is also a variant is developed called Berg Panther. Lop the turret off, and you've got a recovery vehicle, which the Germans are severely needing, but yet again, there's not enough produced. Much like many German vehicles, spare parts are not forthcoming from industry. They're so focused on building those newer tanks, those new tanks, to keep them rolling out as much as possible. The spare parts aren't around. So the Panther, it gets described by a lot of people as the first main battle tank. It wasn't. It was a medium tank. A medium tank to be paired off with a slightly larger cousin, but we'll get onto that later. Panther, yes, its stats are really good. A high velocity, much longer than this gun, high velocity 75mm. They initially wanted what's called an L100, so its caliber, the length of the barrel, was 100 times greater than its bore, than the hole at the end. That is basically physically impossible. So they settled for an L70, which is, yeah, long enough. It'll comfortably do the job. But it is still beset with the fundamental problems of being a really complex vehicle for an army that is increasingly relying on conscripts, the training programs are not there. For example, after the war, the British extensively test Panthers and Jagdpanthers. They fail the British Army acceptance trials. Is a reliability test. The British Army needs their vehicles to get into battle. They are useless if they don't make it. It's sort of a lesson for anyone designing a tank, really, that one. But the Panther just isn't up to the cut for the British. It may have that really good frontal armour on paper. It may have that really good gun. It may have decent mobility. But actually, if the reliability isn't there, it's completely pointless. That armour as well, again, while on paper it looks fantastic, but a lot of the reports coming out of the Soviet Union, and even the British using their 17-pounder, you don't need to penetrate it. It will fracture under repeated high-velocity hits. It could just break the armour plate. So, yes, on paper, the Panther's a really good tank, but in battle, operationally, not too great. However, if I was in a Sherman and I rounded a corner to see a Panther in front of me, I'm going to have a bit of a Brown Alert moment on that one. So, you know, swings and roundabouts a little bit with this vehicle. But as I said earlier, Panther is going to be, but they want it to be that sort of main medium tank. The heavy breakthrough tank is one I'm sure we all know. It is Tiger. I don't really need to give Tiger too much of an introduction, but I'm going to try and do it anyway. It's a heavy breakthrough tank. It is extremely thickly armoured at the front. You're looking at 100 millimetres, 102. It's not actually completely flat. It's raked back at about 9 degrees, I believe. But yeah, in effect, it's a big box because it's that payoff. Do you want to go sloped armour? Well, no, actually, because you need the capacity on the inside of Tiger to allow for stuff like radios, ammunition, the crew. So it's also got a really big 88mm gun. Originally a flat gun, anti-aircraft gun, gets used in the ground roll first at Arras that Chris mentioned earlier, but actually then Hitler turns around and goes, I want this in a tank. And it becomes probably the best known, most iconic weapon, infamous weapon even, of the Second World War, really. And it may look like a big tank with a big turret, but you put that 88 in it, and I can assure you it is a very cramped space to live. Tigers are, again, they've got that mythic status, haven't they? They are really sort of the tank of the Second World War. But production numbers-wise, there's not that many of them. When you compare something like the T-34 with about 50,000 built during wartime, we're looking at 1,200, just over 1,200 really for the Tigers, Tiger 1s. It's not enough, and especially when you're dealing with the unreliability and the lack of recovery assets, crucially for this vehicle, spare parts. It's building a picture that the Germans just cannot, increasingly, they cannot sustain the forces that they need. Tiger's organisation, they develop these heavy panzer battalions. And these initially are equipped with Tiger 1s, supported by Panzer 3s, interestingly enough, because, again, they complement each other quite nicely. So they go from having a big, heavy tank with a big gun to a Panzer 3 that's slightly more mobile. And actually, a lot of the time, they are equipping that 75mm short-barreled gun. They go out initially up towards Leningrad, the siege of Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg. But, crucially for the Tank Museum, the 504th Heavy Panzer Battalion goes out to Tunisia in early 43.
And the rest is history.
Very much so.
James, thank you very much. We'll catch up with you again later on. But as many of you will undoubtedly know, the Tank Museum's Tiger has a specific historical significance because, of course, it was the first Tiger tank to be captured intact by the Western Allies. It's a story we tell at our Tiger Day events, and that's just what we're going to see in our next video.
I think if my father were here today to see Tiger 131, he would be amazed to know that it is now the most famous tank in the world, and I think he would be proud to tell people the part that the Foresters played in its capture. But at the same time, I think he would want people to understand its proper historical context. He would want people to know and to understand that although we can appreciate it as a fine piece of engineering, it was in fact a killing machine invented by the most heinous regime in history. And I think we should always remember that.
Welcome back to this VE Day 80th anniversary live stream coming to you from the Tank Museum. Now, of course, the Desert War was absolutely crucial in achieving ultimate victory, and I'm back with Chris Copson here to look at some of the British tanks that were used during this theatre of war.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to talk about two tanks here. We have an infantry tank, this one, which is the Valentine, and then over the back there is a cruiser tank, the Crusader. Now, the Desert War brings a whole new range of problems. Extremely long track mileage. I mean, it's a big place and you've got to get places. Abrasion, mechanical problems through sand, and of course, the heat. Sitting in a tank in desert conditions is rather like sitting in an oven. So we need vehicles that can actually cope with that, and they did to varying degrees. Now, the Valentine, in my opinion, this is one of the real unsung heroes. Everybody talks about Shermans and Tigers and things like that. Valentine doesn't get a look in. In fact, they built about 8,000 of these, and it represents a quarter of British tank construction during World War II. It is designed as an infantry tank, so it's not particularly fast, about 15 miles an hour, and reasonably heavily armoured, up to 65 millimetres of armour plate. But it went on in the Western Desert to do a variety of things. It acts as an infantry tank, but also effectively takes on the mantle of a cruiser tank. And in my opinion, it actually does those two jobs better than the majority of the others. It is capable of being upgraded. So we start off with the 2-pounder gun, which you've seen before. That is upgraded to a 6-pounder. And with that configuration particularly, and we run up to 9 different marks, Valentine Mark 1 to Mark 9, it is well able to take care of that mid-range Axis armour, your Panzer II, Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, things like that. So it's good, it is reasonably reliable, it's got an AEC petrol engine, it's a good little tank. It's what it goes on to do afterwards, because the Valentine becomes a test bed for a whole range of different things, including quite a lot of the tanks that became the D-Day funnies. So the Valentine is actually used as a model for the DD floating tank. It's one survivor, owned by the excellent John Pearson. If you get the chance to go and see it, please do. It is also used as a mine flail, variety of a bridge layer, all these experimental things being developed on the Valentine chassis. So from that perspective, it is thoroughly good news. And then later on in the war, we get the Valentine Archer. Now that is a slightly odd vehicle in some ways. It's a Valentine tank with a 17-pounder anti-tank gun stuck on top. The odd thing about it is it actually points backwards. That isn't as silly as you might think. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun is very good news indeed. It's a very powerful weapon. in an ambush situation, if you've got the gun sticking out of the back deck, you can sit there, hold down, knock out enemy vehicles, and then if you need to, you can go out quick. So that is the Valentine. As I said, I really think this tank it's an unsung hero. It's one that ought to be more in the public mind. Valentine, and then over the back there we have got Crusader. Now the Crusader, this again is British fascination with cruiser tanks. So it's reasonably fast. It'll do 25 miles an hour. It's not that heavily armoured, but you may be able to see this from here. The armour is fairly well sloped. It's got a lower profile. Now the Crusader was actually developed pretty well in parallel with another tank called the Covenanter, which has got the reputation of being the worst tank of World War II. I'm really not sure whether that's justified. Covenanter, I'm afraid, is very, very complicated, actually never sees service. But Crusader does. Crusader in the Western Desert. It's not a bad vehicle in some ways. It is Harry's Rommel, the retreat of the Afrika Korps back from Egypt into Tunisia. But the big problem with Crusader is it's unreliable. And it's down to massive track mileage. It doesn't cope well with that. You get lots of hydraulic problems, oil seal leaks, things like that. And also, I'm afraid it's build quality. The tank industry, the tank factories are ramping up production. You've got a bunch of guys in there who frankly have never built a tank before, and sometimes they're not doing a very good job. So with Crusader, as soon as there's something better available, we're probably talking about the M3 Grant and the M4 Sherman, when they appear in the Western Desert, Crusader is effectively back squadded.
Many thanks, Chris. And just coming across here now, back across to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now, there is one major tank-producing nation that we've yet to look at in any depth, and that's something that Ian is going to put right for us straight away. So, Ian, the USA would famously be described as the arsenal of democracy, and that kind of makes sense because I understand all the vehicles that we're about to discuss were all first used by the British.
Yeah, that's right, Nick. All three of them. This one is the first. This is the light tank M3, or the Stuart. British used this from mid-1941 in North Africa, and it's fair to say that they love it. It's roughly equivalent to the cruiser tanks that were already operating. The gun is not perhaps quite as effective, but it's pretty close. But really what matters is this is so much more reliable and durable than anything we can build at this point in the war. That's because the Americans have turned their car industry, their truck industry, over to building tanks, and they are going to build tens of thousands of them over the next 4 years. They build 13,800 of the M3 alone, another 9,000 of the M5 Stuart, which is a version of this slightly upgraded and improved, and thousands of other vehicles as well that we'll see a bit later. This has got a crew of 4. We've got a commander and gunner in the turret, and then a driver and an assistant driver in the hull. A 37mm gun and up to 38mm of armour across the vehicle. The engine is taken from the aviation industry. It's built for aircraft. That means it's light, it's compact, it's powerful, and it's reliable. On good ground, this can do about 35 miles an hour. And, well, obviously light is a relative term. This still weighs about 13 tonnes, but that's much less than other vehicles. When we looked at the M24, we saw how the Americans used it in their companies. In British service, this is used in troops of 4 tanks. 4 troops within a squadron, and then 3 squadrons within an armoured regiment. And when it first comes into service, mid-1941 into 42, this is perfectly capable of holding its own in frontline combat. But as the Germans bring in more powerful tanks, more powerful guns, this starts to get outclassed, and within maybe a year, 18 months, it's been relegated to those reconnaissance screening roles that we were talking about earlier. By the end of the war, it's being used in Italy. They've actually taken the turret off a lot of British units on the grounds that the gun is particularly helpful, and for reconnaissance you want as good a view as possible. So 2 guys looking through periscopes isn't that great compared with 2 guys looking through binoculars. Now, its replacement for the M3 is also called the M3, just to be confusing, but this one is the medium tank M3, the Lee or the Grant. Much, much bigger, much more powerful tank, but there are still some similarities. We've got a beefed up version of the same suspension system. That gun in the turret on top is still that 37mm, and although the engine is a more powerful version, it's still taken from the aviation industry. It weighs about 28 tons now and up to 51mm of armour, and there are 2 different versions. The American version, which the British call the Lee, and the British version, which the British call the Grant. Key difference is that top turret. The Americans have a crew of 7, so they've got the commander, the driver, a gunner and a loader for both of those guns, and then a separate radio operator in the hull. Whereas the British, we like the commander to be operating the radios, so he does, and we can remove that separate radio operator. The real thing about the M3 Grant is that 75mm gun on the side of the hull. Ideally, everyone wants that in a turret, but the technology to do it in late 1940, 41, when these things are being built, is just not there yet. So put it in the hull, and at least it's on the battlefield. It'll do as a stopgap. So no one's thinking this thing is going to stick around for the entire war. It's got a short lifespan by design. The Americans build 6,258 of them, so some stopgap. Mid-1942, they're first operated by the British, again in North Africa, and then they carry on through the rest of the campaign until the German surrender in Tunisia. Then some of them are moved across to Burma, where the British keep on using them. The Americans retire it entirely after the Tunisian campaign. So like I said, it's never intended to stick around. It's designed right from the start with a limited lifespan, and it's going to be a stopgap. The tank that the Americans and British really want to do, that's the main kind of combat job, is the M4 Sherman, which we'll talk about now. We've finally got that 75mm gun into that turret. 360-degree traverse, you can deal with enemies coming at you from all directions. But otherwise, the general good rule with the Sherman, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And a lot of the M3, the medium, isn't broke. The drivetrain, the engines, the suspension, okay, it's been beefed up slightly, but it's still fundamentally the same system. And a lot of the internal fittings are carried over from the M3. The Sherman is a very good tank, it is. There's controversy and there's pluses and minuses to it, but fundamentally it is a very good, very well-made tank. Weighs about 30 metric tons, top speed on road 25 miles an hour, 40 kilometres an hour, and depending on the different variants, you've got a range of between 100, 120 miles, again, on decent ground. You can probably anything up to halve those numbers once you start going across country. Again, 51mm of armour and a crew of 5, commander and gunner, loader, driver and assistant driver. It's also very sophisticated. Perhaps people don't always realise this, but there is a lot of sophisticated kit on a Sherman. Probably top of the list would be a gun stabiliser. This means, well, in theory it means you could fire the gun on the move with some level of accuracy. In practice, what tended to happen was crews would use the stabiliser to keep the sight roughly on target, and then you'd stop the tank and you'd be very quick to be able to fire that first shot. Hopefully, first shot hits and you win the encounter and you survive. We've also got things like a synchro mesh on the gearbox. Pretty much every car has that these days, but that's brand new on tanks in the 40s. That makes changing gear for the driver quicker, easier, and there's less potential to do damage by grinding things about. So a little thing, but makes a big difference. They're first used, again, by the British at El Alamein in October 1942, and they are as good as anything else on the battlefield. The gun, the armour, and they are, like I said, far, far more reliable than just about anything out there. So they're popular, but they do have flaws. And as the North African campaign continues, and then the Allies fight into Italy, they start to identify what some of those flaws are, and they start thinking, okay, how are we going to improve these?
Well, thank you, Ian, very much. We're going to pick up with you later on exactly what it is they did to address some of those issues with the Sherman tank later on. But for now, it's over to Richard, who's going to be looking at another tank-building nation that we've yet to look at yet.
Thank you very much, Nick. So I'm back with Sam now. Sam, Italy, arguably a nation that not much is known about tank design.
Yes, they're often very much overlooked when it comes to tank design. It's not without merit. They do have some very interesting designs with their tanks. But when your main ally is Germany and you're being overshadowed with the Panzer IVs and your Tigers, they're very much underappreciated in their tank design. Now, Italy, after the First World War, started its tank development in the 1920s, along with most other nations. First of all, they did as many countries did, which was bootleg someone else's design. They took the Rennes LFT from the French and designed it into something known as the Fiat 5000, which is just a riveted variant of the Rennes LFT. And what they discovered is that mobility really stuck out to them. Cavalry, armoured cavalry, that is what the Italians wanted. Some fast vehicles to move across the battlefield, engage the enemy, and act as sort of this front line to lay a path for the infantry to move through. And nothing says mobility more than the vehicle stood behind me. This vehicle is the entire reason I agreed to do this, because it is my all-time favourite vehicle. This is the Carro Veloce. Now, the Carro Veloce very much embodies speed. That is its main power. It is a light tankette vehicle. It's based off, its origins is found in the Carden-Lloyd tankette. This tankette principle is what the Italians wanted to explore. They wanted to look at how these lighter armoured vehicles could perform on the battlefield. And this initially came in the design of the CV-29, which was just sort of a rebuild of that Carden-Lloyd. And then when it went into production, it became the CV-33, which is the vehicle you see just behind me. The CV-33 is a very interesting design. Its upper half is pretty much a one-piece press bit of steel. Its lower half is a riveted construction. And it worked. It was effective. It was mobile. It was agile. It was upgradable, strangely so. It initially mounts 2 machine guns in the hull, and that's what it goes on to mostly with its service as the CV-33. But as it goes forwards, that 33 design is getting a bit old. The single piece of steel press construction is getting quite expensive, so they switch over to what's known as the CV-35, which is a fully bolted variant of this vehicle. But the one behind me is very unique, not just because of what's sticking out the gun, which we'll talk to a bit later, but also in its design. This is known as a CV-33 Mark II. It's sort of at the end of its production. When you're getting into 1935, these vehicles are getting a bit old, as I mentioned, so they decide to give it a light upgrade. That comes in the form of putting a brand new suspension system, which will feature on those CV-35s, and that is mounted to these vehicles. But one of the main upgrades they make to this, what you typically see coming out of these 33 Mark IIs, is the flamethrower variant, which is what you see behind me. Not just that, it's got a trailer coupled at the back. This is about getting that flamethrower up into the main bit of the battlefield, laying it down on the enemy as quickly as possible. It was good, but the main issue, in order to be light, in order to be mobile, it's not very well armoured. And not only is the main vehicle not very well armoured, neither is the trailer, and this led to a lot of susceptibility to fire. That trailer gets hit, this vehicle goes up. But not only did it have a flame-throwing variant, weirdly enough, this very small vehicle had many, many different types of variants. You could fit an AT rifle in the front of it. Mortars were strapped to the outside of it. There was bridge-laying variants made of this. At one point, they were going to bolt this to the bottom of a bomber and airdrop it into the battlefield. That idea didn't go very far, but these Carro Veloces were effective. They've seen service throughout different theatres of war at this point. They see service in the Second Sino-Japanese War, in the Spanish Civil War, where they go toe-to-toe with the T-26s I mentioned earlier. And this sparks a change in the Italian design. These obviously don't fare very well when going against tanks. So this spurs the Italians to rethink their design and design a new type of vehicle, the Carro Armato. in the form of the 1340 and later the 1441. Now, this is a medium tank design, heavily inspired by that T26, which is heavily inspired by the Vickers 6-tonner. This is more akin to a tank. Now, it is mobile, but it is very lightly armoured still. Again, this is designed in sort of the late 1930s. It has a more interesting design in the sense it's got a hole-mounted machine gun, whereas sort of the T26s didn't really, but it was effective. It worked. The early forms, those 1340s, were great. They were slow, they were unreliable, but its upgrade, the 1441, was a lot better. But what's more notable about these is actually its different variant, and that coming in the form of the Semivente, which is the self-propelled variant of these 1441s, these 1340s. That is really the standout vehicle the Italians had in their arsenal. It was more than capable of knocking out most armoured vehicles at the time. Its armour wasn't great, its mobility was okay, but its gun was good enough that it could put damage on the enemy. And this thing saw service even past when the Italians surrendered. The Germans took this on and utilised it themselves.
Fantastic, Sam. Thank you so much. I'm still somewhat shocked, though, that it's your favourite vehicle.
Yes.
And now we're going to have a bit of a musical interlude and also a quick message from the D-Day darlings. And those of you that are aware of Britain's Got Talent, they were actually the finalists way back in 2018.
Hi everyone, it's darling Katie and darling Emily from the D-Day Darlings, and we are in the midst of our VE Day 80 tour, and we're currently setting up at the Mansfield Palace ready for today's performance. Very much looking forward to that.
We are, and we wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to everybody at World of Tanks, the Tank Museum, and everyone at home watching this live stream.
Yes, now the D-Day Darlings is very, very important to us, and particularly passing on the message of remembrance, and it's been inspired by how this wonderful music moves that glorious generation.
Yes.
We're so moved every time we perform to veterans and people that were around at that time, and we love to shine a light on remembrance and just make sure that we never ever forget, particularly on this poignant year as we mark VE Day 80.
Yes.
Such a glorious moment. We hope that you're enjoying the live stream, and we just send all our love to you all.
Mwah.
How did it feel to be so young, to walk away into the unknown? How did it feel to be so strong while you carried your brother home? How did you hold on through the pain? You lost your friends, you stayed so brave. How did you learn to keep the faith? And now there's bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover because of you. And now we live in love and hope, where we can hold our families close because of you. On the longest day, on the longest day. How did you face the fear of losing the family you made? How do you soldier on when all hope is gone? And now there's bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover because of you. And now we live in love and hope, where we can hold our families close because of you.
Many thanks to the D-Day darlings. They're currently on tour, so we wish them all the very best and hope everything goes well. And please do follow them on their numerous social medias.
But for now, it's welcome back to the Tank Museum and our special 80th anniversary VE Day live stream. Now, we're just 6 weeks away from Tankfest, which is our biggest fundraising event of the year, which is, of course, sponsored by our friends at World of Tanks. And thanks to both World of Tanks and our friends at the French Tank Museum, there will be a very special guest at this year's show, but more on that later on.
And if you missed last year's Tankfest, here's a look at just what happened.
Tankfest, Richard. Without question, I'm sure you'll agree, it's one of the finest shows of its kind you can see anywhere in the world. Of course, tickets are selling fast. Head to our website now if you don't want to miss out. But if you're not able to get there this year, Richard and I will be live streaming once more from Tankfest live on Sunday, the 29th of June.
Yes, made that clear. We're now entering, of course, the final phase of the war, and by now the tank has proven itself, and there is a race to deliver bigger and better guns to defeat thicker armour, which means, of course, that the tank starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And here is what happened in the final stages of World War II.
As 1944 dawns, the Germans are on the defensive. In Italy, the Allies have been pushing up the peninsula and launched the Anzio landings to break the deadlock, but this is frustrated. The build-up for the invasion of northwest Europe continues at pace, with the UK becoming a vast military camp filled with men, machines and supplies for the reconquest of Europe. The Allies win the Battle of Monte Cassino, and they capture Rome on the 4th of June. D-Day, the long-awaited Allied invasion of Normandy, takes place on the 6th of June. With casualties lighter than expected, Operation Overlord is considered a great success. The initial success becomes bogged down in the Normandy bocage, where the terrain suits the defenders. Caen is eventually liberated, and Operation Cobra sees a breakout of US forces from the Normandy beachhead. German resistance in Normandy collapses with defeat at Falaise. Operation Dragoon, an invasion of southern France, pushes up from Marseille and Toulon. Paris is liberated in August, and by September, the Allies are liberating cities in Belgium in the north and reach the Siegfried Line in the south. Intent on ending the war before Christmas, the Allies launch Operation Market Garden to shortcut the route into Germany. Parts of the Netherlands are liberated, but the operation is a failure. As autumn turns to winter, the Western Allies are beginning to bring the fight onto German soil. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army's attritional battle with the Germans continues. Despite occasional seesawing, the Red Army is relentlessly making progress towards Berlin. They liberate Crimea and Belarus, taking Romania, Bulgaria, and parts of Poland. Hungary, Slovakia, and Yugoslavia will be next, and on an increasingly moving front, the Soviets also reach German soil in East Prussia. In December, the Battle of the Bulge begins in Belgium with a major German assault through the Ardennes forest. Taking the Allies by surprise, it's several weeks before the threat is contained, and the Allies can take the offensive once more. By January 1945, it's clear that it can only be a matter of time before Germany is defeated. But they fight on ferociously, with the war closing in on their own towns and cities. Warsaw is liberated, and in March, the Western Allies cross the symbolically significant Rhine River. Soviet troops enter Austria, and in the west, the German city of Frankfurt is captured. With the German army now in full retreat, the Allies come across concentration camps, finding horrific evidence of extermination camps and the Holocaust of Europe's Jewish population. As April draws to a close, the Soviet army is massing on the outskirts of Berlin. With the situation hopeless, Hitler shoots himself on the 30th. On the 2nd of May, Soviet troops storm the Reichstag building and hoist their flag above Berlin. On the 4th, German troops in Denmark, northern Germany, and the Netherlands surrender. And on the 7th, the German state surrenders unconditionally to the Allies. The ceasefire takes effect at 1 minute past midnight on the 8th. The war against the Japanese in the Far East will continue until September. But for now, the Allies celebrate their victory after 6 years of devastating war in Europe. Millions are dead, and the world will never be the same again.
Welcome back to our special VE Day 80th anniversary stream live from the Tank Museum. I'm joined by Ian again, and we're going to take a look at what the Soviets were doing in those final phase of the war. So, Ian, we heard from Chris earlier about how the Soviet KV-1 was withdrawn because it didn't really offer anything more for the price than the T-34 could. So where did they go from there?
That's right. The KV-1 has the same gun as the T-34, 76.2mm. Yes, it has thicker armour, but by this point in the war, that's not really an advantage. German guns can get through it anyway, and it is more expensive, less reliable, and more complicated to build. So, mid-1943, the Soviets withdraw it, but they still want a heavy tank. They still need a heavy tank, so they're working on what becomes the IS-2, the Joseph Stalin II. Perhaps the biggest problem was the gun, and the solution to that is a 122mm caliber piece called the D-25T that's adapted from an artillery piece that the Soviets already operate. Yes, it has an armor-piercing round, but its high explosive round is incredibly powerful against buildings, but also there are accounts of it hitting tanks and just tearing them apart along the weld seams. It's not technically penetrating the armour, I suppose, but it's still getting the kill on the German vehicle. It has thicker armour. The KV had 90mm. This has 120 as a maximum, but in a vehicle that weighs pretty much the same, about 46 metric tons. Still has that a version of that Kharkiv V2 engine that Chris talked about. Very capable power plant, and powers this tank just as well as it powers T-34s and everything else. And a crew of 4, as I'm sure you're used to by now. Downside to this ammunition is that it's absolutely enormous. The rounds weigh something like 25 kilograms each, and they're separate loaded. So you load the projectile and then the propellant in two stages. That's pretty much halves the rate of fire, down to maybe 3 rounds a minute, compared with other tanks. So it's a slower, more ponderous tank to actually fight in, if you like. They're operated in what are called Guards Heavy Tank Regiments. These have 21 tanks, 4 companies, each with 5 tanks, and there's also their own company of around 100 Soviet infantrymen armed with submachine guns. These are the famous tank riders, so they work with the tanks, operate with them, and protect them as they go. Those units aren't going to be in frontline combat day in, day out. They're held by higher headquarters. They're assigned to particular operations as needed, and once they've done their job, they'll be withdrawn, refit, ready to go for the next job. These tanks are incredibly useful, especially in urban areas as the war draws to a close, up to and including the fighting in Berlin. Although by that point, their main opponent isn't a tank. Their main opponent is more than likely the very small, very compact, but very, very lethal Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Ian. And also, just one other thank you there to Roman at Military Machine for the footage of the IS-2 at Panzer Farm in Poland. But now, it's over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Nick. And now I'm back with James. Now, James, this is not a tank.
No, it's the only not a tank we're going to be talking about today. This is an assault gun. It is, I'm sure you're all aware, but this is the Stug 3, based on the Panzer III chassis, but actually it's not got a turret. Initially built as an artillery weapon, really, it's going to have a shorter barrel, much shorter barreled main gun than one we've got on here. But it was pretty much designed to drive up to enemy fortifications and blow them up with a low velocity, high explosive round. But actually, it could also fire heat, and that turned out to be quite good at killing tanks. So they changed its role slightly. They put a much larger 75mm gun on it, much longer bit of kit, and this is capable of dealing significant damage to pretty much all Allied armour. The other benefit of it being in a casemate, which is what we call this, as opposed to a turret, is that this whole vehicle is a lot lower than a Panzer III, for example. It's also a lot cheaper. Turrets are really expensive. One of these is about 20–25% cheaper than its turreted companion. But what's the downsides to it then? Well, of course, if you're conducting offensive actions, having a turret that can move is really helpful. This you cannot have. But actually, the Germans don't necessarily need that, because at this point in the war, they're really on the defensive. They're looking at ambush situations, stopping Allied and Soviet counterattacks, or just attacks in general. And an ambush weapon like this that is not much higher than your average soldier, well, the German hopeful average soldier anyway, it's actually going to be really handy. The other thing about this vehicle you may or may not be able to see is on the front plate here, we've got what looks like waffles. And that is an early form of Zimmerit armour, which, if you don't know, it's a paste that they put on, and if you slap an anti-tank weapon on it, a magnetic anti-tank weapon, it won't stick. It removes the magnetism from this vehicle. Problem is, the main user of these weapons was the Germans, so they ended up armouring against a threat only they themselves possessed. So, all in all, kind of a waste of time, but it looks cool. This is so successful that they start looking to do it with other vehicles. Now, this is when we move on to the Jagdpanther. Now, this is a much bigger cousin from the Stug. It has got an absolutely whopping great 88mm, which is pretty much the same gun as we will find on the Tiger II. This is a slightly different version, more of the anti-tank gun as opposed to the tank gun, but it fires the same ammunition. It's pretty much the same barrel. Based, shockingly, off of the Panther's hull, it is still beset with the same problems that the Panther is, and I spoke about them earlier. You know, for example, when these guys, well, 3 of them engaged British Churchills in Normandy, they knocked most of that squadron out successfully, but after the battle, they lost 2 to mechanical breakdown. So yes, it's great having these extremely potent weapons, but again, it's kind of pointless if you can't get them to the battle. The front plate on that Jagdpanther is absolutely massive. Pretty much nothing the Allies have is getting through it. It is sloped, it is raked back so heavily. It's got a massive mantlet to support that main gun as well. In an ambush situation, Fields of Normandy, when it first saw combat, really, really dangerous bit of kit. But it's not that good, again, in the offense. But again, it's 1944. The Germans are not attacking. That being said, talking of that main gun, I think there's something else that also is equipped with it.
Talking of big cats and big guns, of course, we did mention earlier on about the big news. Now, of course, some of you would already have seen that the big news this year is welcoming the King Tiger to Tankfest, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, this particular tiger belongs to the Musée des Blondes in Saumur, France. And here's a video that they produced that looks at the history of this particular vehicle.
Welcome to the French Musée des Blindés. Here is our King Tiger, one of the few still surviving nowadays in the world. And our King Tiger is the only one still in running condition. Until 2024, we had absolutely no idea what was its special history. Until 2024, its number 233 on camouflage had absolutely no links to its own past. The only thing we had was it arrived in Saumur in 1975, sent from Satory, southwest Paris. Satory was a test and development area. All tanks were stored just after the war to be studied. The mechanical parts were in good condition, so in the late 70s, the Musée des Blindés decided to restore its mobility, and since then, this very King Tiger has been the only one still in working order in the world. Here we are, in Saumur 50 years ago, 20th of February 1975. Our King Tiger just arrived in Saumur rail station. Its original camouflage and Zimmerit are not in good condition. This is no surprise. Until then, it was just so as a test vehicle. Take a look at the turret. There is a 3 and 2 zeros. This is even clearer in this picture taken some time earlier at Satory. With those pictures, an historian, Max Stein, identified our tank. King Tigers were not that numerous during the Battle of France. Only one at the number 300, and a serial turret with hooks for spare tracklings. It was the number 300 for the 3rd Company of the Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, Tank Commander Hauptmann Walter Scherf. In early August 1944, this unit is preparing its new received tank at Mailly-le-Camp. At this very moment, a propaganda staffel is passing by and takes a series of pictures of the crews painting their tanks. Some pictures are clearly showing King Tiger number 300 during painting job and once the work is done. To be frank, we are very lucky. Based on those pictures, it was easy to reproduce its camouflage, and we repainted our King Tiger in 2024, just in time to participate to the 80th commemoration of the Battle of Normandy. It was for us really important because this very tank fought in the last days of the Battle of Normandy in late August 1944. At that time, in Normandy, Allies are pursuing the defeated German forces. They are retreating toward the river Seine. To give them time, fresh German troops are sent to slow down the Allied advance. Some Tiger IIs from the Schwerpanzerabteilung 503 are sent in, and among them the number 300. The fight begins on the 21st of August near the town of Fontenay-Saint-Père in the Vexin area, between Normandy and Parisian region. As a testimony of its fighting, Tiger 300 took 2 heavy hits on its frontal armor. On 28 August 1944, its retreat time. It's no more possible to contain the Allied advance. Just after leaving the little town of Wainville-en-Vexin, the left track on the left drive sprocket broke. The crew tries to repair. Nothing can do. 3 men go by foot to find help. The 2 others prepare towing cables. But time is flying. The German defenders are leaving the sector. American troops arrive soon after. Tiger 300 crew, still hoping to save their vehicle, is surprised and had to flee with no time to destroy their tank. Few months later, the French recover the King Tiger. But there are 2 problems. First one, the gearbox can't be repaired. Second one, the 2 hits on the frontal armor cracked the welds, so the hull had to be replaced. A new hull from another King Tiger is put in condition with technical parts from Tiger 300 and other King Tigers. After several tests, the tank is stored at Suttery. So, there is a story of our King Tiger. I hope you enjoyed it. Please follow us on our social media and come to visit us. In France, Saumur at the Musée des Blindés. See you soon.
A massive thank you to Adrian at the Musée des Blindés in Saumur, France. Now we've moved across now, we're back with James in front of the Tank Museum's very own King Tiger.
Yes, one of 2 ones we've currently got in the museum. Talk about that one actually for a bit. The 2 different types of turret, sometimes erroneously called many things, but one is pre-production and one is the production. The pre-production has got that lovely sloping front to it, but the problem is with that is it's quite expensive to produce and it's a massive shot trap, which means that a round will get stuck underneath the turret, which is not good. This is the production, lovely big flat front face to its turret. Means it's cheaper, but actually also you ain't going to have the problem of a round getting stuck underneath the turret, which is always good. This one here got more of that Zimmerit armour on the front of the hull that you can see. It's a reproduction, this one. This isn't real. We do have some real stuff at the back, but all the stuff you're seeing at the moment is a reproduction. The King Tiger it's a development of the Tiger, shockingly. And it's taking it to the next level. It is bigger, it is more heavily armoured, it's incorporating the sloped armour that actually is now becoming really obviously very effective and worth any negatives that may be surrounding it. And it's got this whopping great big 88mm main gun, which is significantly longer than what was equipped on the Tiger 1. Even then, on the inside of this tank, it is quite cramped because you've filled it with a gun and ammunition. The back of the turret, completely full of ammunition on this thing. There's basically nowhere else to put it. The rounds are that big. The tracks, really quite wide. You need this because it weighs quite the number of tons. And I've mentioned it again, so I won't harp on about it too much this time, but recovery of this vehicle is nearly impossible. Like previous big cats, we've got the interleaved road wheels down the side. Brilliant for distributing weight, absolute nightmare for maintenance on this thing. If you want to get to one road wheel, you might have to take off 5 or 6 other ones. And when you're in the heat of combat, that's less than ideal. Much like the Tiger 1, you also have combat tracks and transport tracks on this thing. Our one has actually got some battle damage down the side. I'm not sure you may see it in some of the B-roll that's being played over me. But it's got a couple of scuffs out the side of it from a Sherman 75mm. The side armour just took it. Absolutely no problem at all. It's a really well-protected vehicle, but it is so heavy. It's got the same engine, that HL230, that the later Tigers are running around with, Tiger 1s I should say, along with the Jagdpanther. Problem is, this is like 20 tons heavier. You're putting so much strain on the components that the final drive, the transmission on this thing, is really prone to failure. It is, you try and put it up particularly angry-looking slope, and it might give out on you, which is not really a situation you want if you're a tank crew. Beyond that, it is not built in that many numbers. The German industry just can't do it. They can't produce the numbers that is actually needed to support the war effort. You're looking at just over 400, which again, you compare it to stuff like the Sherman on 50,000 and the T-34 on similar numbers, it's not enough. No matter how good your one vehicle is, if you're constantly having to face off against full armoured divisions, it's not really going to make any difference to you. One variant to come out of this is the Jagd Tiger. This is even heavier. And much like the Jagd Panther and the Stug that we've been talking about, it's about using an already existing hull and mounting an even bigger gun on it in a casemate. So the Jagd Tiger runs around with a 128mm main gun, which most people describe as overkill, because this 88 is getting through pretty much all Allied armour on the battlefield at this point. But if you look at what Ian was just talking about, the IS-2s, maybe there is some logic to this 128. If the Russians are continuing that heavy tank development, in a few years' time, this 88 might not be useful. So if that war's continuing, maybe you do need a 128mm main gun. Maybe you don't. We don't know. But it is a massive bit of kit. You're introducing a new vehicle with a new gun, new ammunition onto the battlefield, where the Germans are barely supporting the stuff they already have. Another thing about the Jagd Tiger, it's got no cupola. Most of the German tank destroyers don't have a cupola, but your vision from the inside of that vehicle is next to nothing. Vision, and I'm sure Richard is aware, that actually it's terrible in a tank anyway, even when you have a full cupola and you can see and you can swivel your head around. Imagine not having that. Just a little periscope trying to see where the enemy is, and you've got aircraft overhead, you've got infantry coming at you. It's a recipe for disaster. And that's the environment that these late war German heavy tanks are facing. It isn't in, like, for example, in World of Tanks, where you're tank v tank versus whole division versus an army corps. Like, this is an absolute mismatch. Much like the Germans at the beginning part of the war had their armoured divisions, their panzer divisions, it's almost flipped. Like, the British and the Americans are absolutely steamrollering the Germans at this point. It is artillery, it is armour, it is air power. And no matter how good your tank is, it's not going to stand up to that.
James, thank you so much. And with that, we're going back across to you, Nick.
Thank you, Richard. I think I can speak for absolutely everyone who's going to be at Tankfest this year and say that we are so looking forward to seeing that King Tiger running at Tankfest. So thank you very much to our friends at Saumur. That's something that's never been seen in the UK before. But now I'm here with Chris. And Chris, we're going to have a look at how it was the British were responding to those big changes on the battlefield.
Yes, well, obviously tank development continues throughout the war. I mean, towards the end of the war, the British Army is using a lot of American armour through Lend-Lease, but we're still continuing to develop our own tanks, AFVs, and we're continuing with the same theme. Remember, we're talking about cruiser tanks, infantry tanks. The two that I want to talk about now are effectively the end of the line, the last of the infantry tanks, the Churchill, and really the last of the cruiser tanks, which is this one here, the Comet. Now, if we start with the Churchill, frankly, if you look at it, it looks a bit crude. I mean, certainly the early marks have exposed tracks that wrap all the way around the hull. It is a tank that had its problems. It's being built by Vauxhall Motors, and certainly to begin with, mechanically, it's a bag of bolts. It really is. Major problems with drivetrain, with hydraulics. It takes a lot of sorting out. It's got to the stage where effectively you've got Vauxhall mechanics attached to units just to try and keep the tanks going. And it gets to the stage where the Dieppe raid, they perform very badly indeed. They can't get up the beach, they can't make the sea wall, so you get those dreadful scenes of knocked out Churchills lying all over the foreshore, and they almost contemplate knocking the Churchill on its head. I mean, Churchill himself said, well, they've called it after me because I expect it's bloody useless. It wasn't in fact named after him, it was after his ancestor John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough. The good news is they do get it right. They sort it out, and it proves to be a very useful tank indeed. Now, it's not particularly fast, 16 miles an hour, but it's got thick armour. And the later marks, the frontal armour is up to 152 mil, because we're talking infantry tank here. Slow, heavily armoured. The thing that Churchill does bring to the party, though, once they've got it right, is that it's incredibly good at climbing. That thing will go out the wall of a house if you ask it too nicely. And that is a major advantage in places like North Africa, the later stages of the campaign there, in Italy. I mean, this is a tank that can, to everybody's surprise, to the consternation of the enemy, appear at the top of a mountain, where it's gone up the goat tracks. And it's very useful in Normandy, particularly in the Norman bocage. It's able to get across those big, tall hedge banks. It is also upgunned. It starts out with a 2-pounder gun, then it goes to 6-pounder, then to 75mm, and there's also a close support howitzer. The other thing about the Churchill is it also forms the basis for a number of the funnies of the specialised tanks of 79th Armoured Division, things like the Churchill Crocodile, which is a absolutely terrifying flame-throwing tank, the Churchill Avery, the Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers, which is basically, it'll do anything for you. Demolition charges, it'll lay bridges, it's a sapper's Swiss Army knife. So that is the Churchill, and it's a very, very useful and unassuming, if you like, tank from that mid to late war period. Going into the latter part of the war, we have got the last of the line in terms of cruiser tanks. And that's this. This is Comet. And this is, effectively, it's the British Army sticking to its guns and finally getting it right, because the Comet is an exceptional tank. It is the successor to Cromwell. Cromwell has a number of problems. It does things, it's fast, certainly, but it will chuck tracks at high speed. All those problems are sorted out with the Comet. And with the Comet, like the Cromwell, you have the wonderful Meteor engine. It's based on the Merlin Aero engine, which is down-rated, and it's a terrific piece of kit. This tank is capable of over 40 miles an hour. So fast, in fact, that it's actually governed at 32 miles an hour, because otherwise you get too much damage to tracks and wheels and things like that. The gun itself is the high-velocity 77mm. That's based on the very impressive 17-pounder gun with a shortened barrel with a 3-pounder breech. It fires the same round as the 17-pounder, but with a lower charge. But even with that, it will penetrate up to 126mm of armour at 1,000 metres. That is good performance. They don't come in until fairly late in the war. The only major unit to be fully equipped with Comet is 11th Armoured Division. They're getting their Comets from January, February 1945, and they take the Comet across the Rhine and into Germany. And we have been recently, something to look out for on YouTube when we get around to making it, there is a duel on the River Aller between a Tiger and a Comet squadron. Nick.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, would you put your neck on the line and go as far to say that this was the finest British tank of World War II?
If you take the Centurion out of the equation, which misses the war by a month, which we'll talk about a bit later on, I would say it is. It's a cracking tank. And, of course, it goes on to serve in places like Korea. I mean, when you look at these two...
Look at the Matilda 1, of course.
Matilda 1 Comet. See how far we've come in 6 years. That is quite remarkable.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Chris. And now it's back over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm here again with Ian. Now, Ian, when we're talking about the Shermans, the vulnerabilities, of course, were starting to be exposed at this stage in the war. What did they do to address this?
Quite a lot, Richard, and it's not always visible if you just look at the tank from the outside. Early Shermans have got quite a lot of exposed ammunition inside the vehicle, and that makes them vulnerable to catching fire. Now, bust the myths, not really much more vulnerable than any other tank of the period, but still, that's still quite a high rate of catching fire. In 1943, the Americans implement what's called a quick fix program to try and bring that down a bit. They add welded armour panels to the sides of the vehicle over the ammunition racks. They move some exposed rounds that were stacked vertically inside the turret down into armoured boxes lower down and now lying horizontally, so they're better protected and harder to hit. And they cut away a lot of the mesh and screens inside the vehicle that were impeding the crew being able to get out and survive if the tank did catch fire. Those are probably the main changes on that programme. They also look to upgun the tank, improve its firepower. The British go for the Sherman Firefly, which takes the 17-pounder that we've been looking at earlier, and they put it into the existing Sherman's turret. So the 75mm gun comes out, the 17-pounder goes in. This is, if we're being charitable, a very impressive tank. If we're not, it's an absolute nightmare ergonomics and an absolute bodge job of improvisation. But it's there and it does the job. A couple of problems in terms of crew layout, ammunition stowage, ergonomics inside the vehicle. But one of the biggest problems with the Firefly is that it needs that 75mm turret. And when we get to the end of 1943 into 44, the Americans aren't building those 75mm Shermans anymore because they've got their own model, their own improvement that they're coming up with, which is the 76mm gun armed Sherman, which, if you look at Fury, that's what you see on Fury. Now, this is a completely new turret. The Americans wanted a completely new tank to replace the Sherman entirely. That didn't work out, but the turret was fine, the gun was fine, so there's more to it than that, but they put the turret on the existing proven Sherman hull. This is a much better gun. It really is. It can penetrate 90mm of armour at 1,000 metres as compared with 60 for the 75mm. And the ammunition, although it's bigger and still vulnerable to catching fire, most of it is now in what's called wet stowage. It's been moved even further down, so rather than being level with the logs, it's more level with the top run of the wheels there and the top run of the tracks. And it's been put in what's called wet stowage. Now, it doesn't mean that the rounds get dipped in a bucket of water. What that means is storage bins which are filled with liquid that will hopefully extinguish any hot fragmentation before it can set the rounds on fire. And then there are hollow cylinders inside that where the ammunition rests for the loader to grab. So, yeah. Wet stowage doesn't mean the rounds are swimming in water. However, the armour protection hasn't really improved. This is just as vulnerable to being penetrated by German tank fire as it always has been. And that gun is more capable, but it's still struggling against the most capable German tanks, Tigers, Panthers, things like that. However, this is still incredibly reliable, incredibly durable, easy, in inverted commas, to build tank, and the Americans exploit that to the full. They build 49,234 Shermans during the war, which is literally 100 times as many Tiger IIs, if you think of it in mathematical terms. But they know its day is passing. They know they're going to need something better, and yes, that initial tank replacement program called the T-23 failed, even if we got the turret out of it. The next program they work to doesn't fail, and this is what becomes the M26 Pershing. This is a complete break from the tanks that we've seen so far. Got a new suspension system. It's using torsion bars like we saw on the M24. It has 100mm of armour, so literally twice as much as the Sherman does. It has that 90mm gun. That's a machine gun. The 90mm gun will come on screen in a minute, I'm sure. It's a bit bigger than that. That can penetrate up to 140mm of armour at 1,000 metres. So you can see this massive step change in what this tank brings to the party compared with a Sherman. Weighs about 42 tonnes. It's got the same engine as one of the Sherman models, the M4A3. And in theory, at least, on road, it's got the same sort of speed, 25 to 30 miles an hour. 20 of them are sent to Europe in January 1945 as part of what's called the Zebra mission. And they do see some combat before VE Day, most famously against a Panther tank in the shadow of Cologne Cathedral.
Right, well, thank you very much, Ian. Now, I think it's fair to say that the Sherman isn't just one of the most important tank designs of World War II, but probably one of the most, well, definitely one of the most important tank designs in history. And if you're a fan of the Sherman tank and you want to support the Tank Museum, there are a range of Sherman things you never knew you needed available in our online shop. Welcome back to the Tank Museum and our very special 80th anniversary of the VE Day stream. So far, Richard, we've only focused on the machines, but a tank can only be as good as its crew.
I couldn't agree more. And in this next video, we're going to hear from a few of the men who experienced conflict on opposing sides in World War II.
In 2017, the Tank Museum opened its Tiger Collection exhibition. This brought together the vehicles of the Tiger family in a single exhibition. 4 World War II veterans contributed their experiences to this exhibition, and at the opening event, the Tank Museum brought them together as well. Wilhelm Fischer and Waldemar Pliska served as the Tiger crew in the German army during the war. Ken Tout and Ernest Slarks were British tankmen who had faced Tiger tanks in action. There were emotional scenes as the veterans, accompanied by their families, were introduced to each other for the very first time.
Me too, sir. Very pleased. Very pleased. That's Ken Tout, and this is Ernest. Ernest Slarks. A tank comrade. You're German, are you? Nie wieder. Yeah. Tiger man, eh? Driver.
They were aided by former World of Tanks employee Marcus Schill, who acted as translator.
In der 7. Panzerdivision bei Rommel. That's right. You were 7th Panzer Division with Rommel.
No, this is 101.
Yeah.
Heavy. Yeah. Wir sollten nach Afrika und ist abgebrochen, weil der Russe
It was a special moment, and we knew it would surely be one of the last of its kind.
Waren Sie in Kursk?
Well, if you were at Kursk, I must shake your hand. Because that was the biggest battle.
In a conversation facilitated by former museum curator David Willey, they shared their feelings of being around tanks once more.
Bei mir war der Eindruck gestern schon hier vor dem Panzer, da war ich selbst überrascht, dass das nicht viel mehr Emotion war wie sonst auch. Also dieser Panzer, Tigerpanzer, verfolgt mich das ganze Leben. Ich habe vieles erlebt mit dem und viele schlechte und gute Zeiten gehabt, aber das Russland, das war ein Abschnitt in meinem Leben, der war erbärmlich und ich musste 3 Jahre damit halten. Und
could I ask Ernst, what do you feel like about coming back here?
I think it's amazing. After over 70 years, we're back. You know, I really can't believe it. And it does bring back a lot of memories, and not all bad memories either. Some good memories.
Good. And Ken?
Well, the tank was your home for long enough. You lived in it. You fired a gun to save your life. And also you saw these terrible things which happened when a tank blew up. And that was something which stays with you forevermore.
I'm sure.
Because it was a visible cremation of one of your friends whilst you looked on. Speaking about friendship in these days, on a number of occasions I took German prisoners, and when I was commander, one of the things I had to do immediately was to talk to them and find out what was happening. And there was an empathy, a fellow feeling that you felt you were special people, because you may have been German, I may have been British, but we have been together fighting, and somehow that cut us off from all the ordinary people who...
Mein größtes Erlebnis ist, wenn ich Sie sehe, dass wir nicht mehr aufeinander schießen brauchen, zur Versöhnung beitragen. Denn was wir erlebt haben, ist egal auf welcher Seite, das war schrecklich. Da wollen wir nicht mehr daran erinnern, obwohl mich das ganze Zeitlebens begleiten wird. Und da komme ich nicht so. Das hat mein Leben geprägt. Ich war 17 Jahre, als man mich einzog. Und das bestimmt mein ganzes Leben. Das kann man nicht vergessen.
Ich will mal fragen, die Auszeichnungen. Was haben wir noch hier?
Well, the French people have very kindly given us a reminder, which my friend also has, to honour all the British soldiers who were in Normandy. So that's that one over there. And the others are denoting, for instance, that one was in a particular area. For instance, I was in Normandy. I was also in Palestine because we had terrorist work after the war. So that's what it denotes. By MBE is a civil one.
Ja. 2. Panzersturmabzeichen, Verwunderabzeichen in Schwarz und die Winterorden. Die Gefrierfreischalten haben mir gesagt, wo die Schlacht mit 41 oder 42 in Russland, wo so kalt war. Das war die Gefrierfreischalten.
Ich hatte nur das Verwundetenabzeichen. Ich habe auf die anderen Abzeichen nicht so viel Wert drauf gelegt.
Ja, wir kennen ja unser Auszeichnung nicht anhängen, den wir angespuckt werden in Deutschland. Ne? Wir sind ja die Kriegsverbrecher.
Yeah, and there is an important point in Germany, obviously, as the nation losing the war. We cannot.
You don't wear the medals.
I can't because I never earned any. But the ones that did can obviously not proudly wear their medals because of history.
Despite their service.
Despite their service. So.
Wie wichtig ist, wir wissen, dass wir praktisch heutzutage, in der heutigen Zeit, der Krieg nicht mehr weit ist. Irgendwie in allen Ecken auf der ganzen Welt brennt es doch. Und da ist es unsere Pflicht, gerade die diese Zeiten mitgemacht haben. Das habe ich auch zeitlebens, ich habe ein Buch geschrieben und für die Zeitung geschrieben, immer wieder gemahnt gegen den Krieg, dass sowas nie wieder passieren darf. Ja. Das war mein Anliegen, zeitlebens daran zu wirken.
Ja.
Und man sollte uns alten Leuten doch mal zugestehen, auch immer wieder zu mahnen, den Finger in die Höhe zu heben. Denkt daran, wenn ihr da zustimmt und nachläuft, diesen Menschenfängern, diese Leute nur in den Krieg, der leidet ihr so drunter, ihr macht Völker kaputt und. Und diese Mahnung möchte ich zeitlebens weitergeben.
Yeah. So it's very, very important, specifically given the state in the world that we are in today, where war is basically almost feels like it's around the corner again, and it's because we don't remember ourselves. The people in charge now have less and less connection, less and less knowledge of what was happening, and remembering that and knowing what terror it brought to people, to the men and women service in the service, but also in the general population. War has always been terrible, and being able to remember it and supporting that memory is very, very dear to them.
Would you like to say anything else as well?
Yeah, I think it's very important, especially for young people. And I came last year, and I was impressed with the young people who came. And I think it's very important they should know, you know.
I agree entirely, because there is so much other things to interest and occupy young people these days that they tend to forget the realities of battle. You have war games and you have films which are dramatic, but you would never participate in them. And we who have been actually in the battle need to be saying what it was really like. With Fury, for instance, you know, the film can only tell you so much, but the veteran can tell you what it really was like.
All were in their 90s then, and sadly, all have subsequently passed away. Almost a decade ago, occasions like this showed us that the wartime generation still had a huge amount to teach us all. But now time has almost run out for us to learn from them.
Well, my goodness me, that was incredibly powerful stuff. Richard, you were there on the day. What kind of recollections do you have from there and the arrangements you made?
Yeah, it was a very emotional day for everybody concerned. I mean, obviously, especially for the veterans' families as well, of course. But I have to say, my own overwhelming thought about the whole day was how privileged I felt to actually be there.
Yeah, and it's striking to see that they were all so eager to convey, you know, that message of reconciliation. And something I really noticed in all of the VE Day coverage I've seen this week is just how few veterans are left with us.
Yes, indeed. And the veterans, of course, also spoke about the realities of war. And you can see just how concerned they were that the mistakes of the past were not repeated.
Yeah, and so much of what they just said in that interview there
so
resonates today, doesn't it? It's almost a little bit scary. So what an important message to take forward. But history shows that the end of the war in Europe would only lead to a new set of problems.
The wartime alliance between the Soviet Union and the West was always ideologically tenuous at best. Disagreements over the post-war order and the future of Eastern Europe fueled mistrust and mutual suspicion that gradually escalated. The West feared Soviet expansionism. The Soviets feared Western interference. Winston Churchill famously coined the term Iron Curtain in 1946 to describe the division of Europe into democratic and communist spheres of influence.
An iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Germany and Berlin itself were divided between East and West zones of occupation. And as the divisions grew, the former Allies increasingly saw each other as a threat. This division solidified the ideological tension and political divide that formed the basis of what became known as the Cold War. As mutual hostility increased, the Cold War led to the formation of opposing military alliances. The US and its allies formed NATO, and the Soviet Union and its allies created the Warsaw Pact.